You're driving home after a full day. Meetings taken, things managed, calendar honored. Somewhere in the quiet before the next obligation, a question surfaces that you usually don't let stay. What was all of that actually for? Not output, not effort, what it was for. Another thing arrives. You move. That motion feels like living. What it might actually be is the question. Somewhere in what follows, Jung makes an observation most people do not expect, that staying perpetually occupied does not protect you from the fear underneath. It feeds it, not despite the motion, but because of it. Once you see the mechanism, the full calendar looks different. Seneca saw it first, not in someone buried in work, but in a man who had stopped moving entirely. Seneca once watched a man named Vatia, a wealthy Roman who had withdrawn entirely from public life, and heard people pass his villa and say, "Here lies Vatia." The joke was that the man had buried himself while still breathing. But what Seneca noticed was more unsettling than Vatia's retreat. He noticed the opposite is equally true. A person can be buried just as completely inside a calendar. The days fill, the weeks are accounted for, the schedule proves the life is in motion. And yet, when you honestly ask, what all of it is for, the answer comes back thin. Motion is not the same as direction. Thoreau called it quiet desperation, but he was careful to say it does not look desperate from the outside. It looks like responsibility, like a life in progress. He wrote that this condition is stereotyped and unconscious, concealed even inside amusement, even inside the performance of a full existence. The person living it rarely names it. They only feel, somewhere underneath, that the activity has not yet resolved into anything that would satisfy the question, what is all of this actually for? That question does not disappear when you stay busy. It only gets deferred. And deferral, it turns out, has its own compounding logic. Seneca named the mechanism clearly. He wrote that the greatest flaw in life is that it is always imperfect, that a certain part of it is always being postponed. The person who lives on hope, who is always almost ready, finds the future perpetually slipping. Each postponement quietly confirms that the present moment is not yet adequate. That confirmation compounds. The debt against yourself grows larger with every deferred beginning. This is not laziness. Lazy people know they are not working. Deferral is more sophisticated. It wears the clothing of preparation. It calls itself patience. It tells you that you are getting ready, when in fact, you are just getting older. Here is the part most people do not expect. Jung observed that idle dreaming, living inside the space of what you will eventually begin, does not protect you from the fear of death. It amplifies it. The person who keeps deferring what matters is not evading mortality anxiety. They are feeding it. Because somewhere underneath the preparation, the self knows that time is passing and the real thing has not yet started. This is why the busiest person in the room is often the most anxious. Not despite their activity, because of it. What then is the busyness actually protecting? Epictetus offered a strange exercise. Pick up a tragic mask, he said. Look at it from a distance, and it terrifies you. Now turn it around and look at it directly. It does not bite. His point was about death itself, that it looks monstrous from the corner of the eye, from the angle of avoidance. But when you examine it face on, something changes. The tradition of memento mori is not designed to produce grief. Its actual function is honesty. It asks a simpler and more difficult question than how much time is left. It asks, what are you actually avoiding by staying this occupied? Thoreau wrote that public opinion is a weak tyrant compared to your own private opinion of what you should be doing next. He called it being the slave driver of yourself. The person who defers what matters is not usually obeying someone else's calendar. They are obeying a story they quietly maintain. The story that they are not ready yet, that conditions are not right, that the real beginning is still ahead. That story is not imposed from outside, it is built from within, and the busyness sustains it. Because as long as you are occupied, the question of readiness never has to be answered. That is what the busyness protects, the permission to keep deferring. The fair objection: if you genuinely sit with the fact that time is finite, doesn't that produce panic rather than clarity? Many people experience mortality awareness as dread, not liberation. This response is real. Epictetus addressed it directly. Death is not formidable, he said. The fear of death is. The error is directing courage at death itself while letting fear move unchecked. Seneca adds, it is not death that makes us sluggish. It is the refusal to reflect on it. Memento mori, done honestly, does not accelerate the false urgency of deferral. It quiets it. I'm genuinely curious. When you sit with your own finitude, even briefly, what comes up? Panic or something quieter? I'd like to hear. Thoreau's most famous passage is often misread as a romantic escape. He describes sitting in the doorway of his cabin from sunrise to noon, not producing anything, and says these hours were not time subtracted from his life, but over and above his usual allowance. He had refused to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment for a future one. Seneca says the same in fewer words. Begin at once to live. Not once you are ready, not when conditions improve. Count each separate day as a separate life. That is not a demand to do more. It is an instruction to stop waiting for the right moment and recognize that this one already qualifies. This is what memento mori actually exposes, not how much time remains, but the quality of what is happening right now. Seneca wrote that a person is anxious about the future only when the present is unprofitable. Marcus Aurelius instructed himself to strip away reputation, praise, and the opinions of others, and ask what remains. What remains is either something that genuinely matters or the quiet recognition that it does not. Finitude is not a whip. It is a mirror. And the mirror does not show you urgency. It shows you the difference between what fills your hours and what you would name, if asked, plainly, what your life was for. That is the question the deferral system has been postponing. William James described St. Catherine of Genoa as someone who took cognizance of things only as they came to her, moment by moment. The divine moment was always the present one, not mysticism, the practical consequence of accepting finitude. Seneca's instruction to count each separate day as a separate life is not a demand. It is a permission to stop deferring the question of what today was for. Memento mori is not a reminder that you are going to die. It is a reminder that you are alive right now, and right now is the only time the question of what matters has ever been answerable. If today were complete as it stands, what would you say it was for? I'd genuinely love to hear your answer in the comments.